Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you as always by the Hockey Podcast Network. As we mentioned at the beginning of the show, and basically 18 different times in our first segment, our guest here on today's episode is Hunter Hodies of the Locked On Penguins podcast. How's it going, Hunter?
Not bad, definitely a little annoying the losing streak, but at least they've gotten some points out of it, so it's nothing too bad.
Yeah, of course, the Penguins have lost 4 straight games, and in those games, the only goal scorers, coincidentally, have been 4 people: Evgeny Malkin, Sidney Crosby, Jake Gensel, and Brian Rust, who is also on a crazy streak. One player that has not scored basically at all this season, that's Zach Aston Reese. And I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on his season to this point? Because he has 1 goal, only 9 points on the season, and people say, listen, he's not a goal scorer, but all of his analytic numbers are starting to hit career lows, which is worrisome to me. So what have you thought about Zach Aston Reese this season?
His defensive impact, I think, is still there. Last night, I really noticed him a lot against Alex Ovechkin. I think he was doing a really nice job on him. And, that's what he's getting paid to do. They're not going to, pay him to score. Obviously, I think he got close to 10 last year, if that sounds correct. Definitely having 1 halfway through the year. I mean, that's not even a 4-goal pace for a full 82-game season. It's not where he wants to be, obviously. But I think I also think that just because the team hasn't been as healthy, he hasn't been able to have that line with McGinn and Bluger as much, especially now with Teddy out for the next 4 to 5 to 6 weeks with a broken jaw.
Yeah.
I think that's going to affect his game even more. But defensively, I still see that impact. He's good on the PK. He's good at suppressing shots. I have noticed that his underlyings offensively have not been good. But I still would like to see some more offense from him. But also I will say this: their depth scoring, I think, has dried up a lot recently. I don't think it's just him. Evan Rodriguez, for as good as he's been, he's really dried up. Dominic Simone is out there not really doing much, even though that's who he's been his whole career. I mean, he's going to be a good playmaker, but he's not going to score. And I think that's kind of what Aston Reese is a little bit. He can play make a little bit, but he's not going to go out there and score. That said, I want to see more from him at this point. It's definitely been a little bit of a disappointment. I said last year that I think he's probably one of the more underrated players on the team, if not the most undervalued. But right now he's not living up to that. Mm-hmm. And I don't really know what you do. Do you put him on the third line? I don't think you put him in the top 6. That's probably not going to do anything. But they got to figure something out with getting more offense from him, and I think a lot of the depth as well.
Mm-hmm. You took the words right out of my mouth in terms of the depth scoring. How important is it that they return to form, or at least begin to contribute a little more, if this team wants to have a legitimate chance at winning?
Yeah, it needs to come back in full force. You can't just have Jake Gensel scoring 40 for you almost every night at this point, just because of how good he's been. Same with Brian Rust. Gino has 5 already in almost a month that he's been back. Sid is starting to really fill the net again. That can't be it. Danton Heinen, he was playing well, but he went in a dry spell. He's still sitting on 9 goals for the last few weeks. I already touched on Evan Rodriguez. He has already a career high, close to 15 goals, but he hasn't scored in the last couple of weeks despite getting the chances. But those are the ebbs and flows of a regular season. Mm-hmm. I already said Simone, Aston Reese. I mean, McGinn, at least he's been having a little bit of a pulse a bit more. He has 10 goals already this year. I still want to see a little more from him, though. Bluger being out, though, I think is such a huge loss that I think not a lot of people, focus on, just because, what he brings to the lineup on an every night basis, both offensively and defensively, especially on the PK, at least. But, it's ultra important. You need 4 lines to score. The Penguins found that out in 2016 and 2017. Then the funny thing is, earlier in the season when they were so banged up with both COVID outbreaks and, Sid being out and then Gino being out, they had the depth scoring. Everyone was stepping up. Now that almost everyone is back, except for a few, it disappears. And then, they're losing in part because the Stars can't do it every night. That's plagued them a few times in the playoffs over the years when they didn't have any depth. But now when there's really no excuses, when you have the depth, and it's shown that you've had the depth this year, mm-hmm. It's crunch time. You're in a dogfight for the top 3 in the division. I'd like to get home ice if they could, but they got to start getting some more depth scoring here and taking some of the pressure off the Stars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. One of the names you didn't even mention through all of this, while he's not necessarily a depth scorer, in the lineup. He's been forced to be a depth player recently.
What
And
are
that
we
is,
going for there?
yeah, is Kasperi Kapanen, who has just gone ice cold throughout this season. And is there a fix in the situation? And if there is, what is it? Or is he just a lost cause?
That's a good question. You know, I touched on that on my episode on Tuesday. I really don't know what you do with this player at this point. I mean, do you move him at the deadline? If you do that, who replaces him? You know, this is probably something that they're going to have to do over the summer. I think right now I don't see how he returns next year. I know he's an RFA, but if you don't give him a qualifying offer, I'm pretty sure he becomes a UFA. Then I think he walks.
Mhm.
And, you know, Ron Hextall has no loyalty to him. He really doesn't have loyalty to most of these players because he didn't really sign them. But especially with Kasperi Kapanen, I mean, you know, and this is what, you know, a couple people just in the Penguins community tried to, I think, warn, you know, everyone going into the season. Like, you know, you look at his shooting percentage from last year, that masked a lot of his inefficiencies. You know, sure, he scored, I believe he had 10 goals. I believe it was 30 points in 40 games, if my math serves me right. So that was all good, but then the numbers, his underlying numbers were not that good. This year, fast forward, his numbers aren't bad, but he looks lost out there. And he basically cost them the game in overtime, I thought, last night. Has no pressure at the top of the point, has the puck, and decides to fire it right out of Capital for no reason, and they don't touch the puck for the rest of the overtime session before Dmitry Orlov's goal. And it's just like, those are the kind of little plays that tells me that he doesn't have any confidence right now. And they put him back with Evgeny Malkin, thinking that this was going to work. And, you know, worked last year, why not? But it didn't. And then he played 8 minutes on Sunday against the Kings. And I think you're seeing what Mike Sullivan, I don't think he knows what to do in this situation. Are they going to scratch him and put Radim Zohorna in there if the team is fully healthy? I mean, I probably not, just because of how, you know, he can turn it on at any second, but it's at a lost cause, I think, right now. And I think next year they're going to have to, I think, cut their losses. And I'm rooting for the guy too. I love the guy. He obviously loves being a Penguin, you know, played really well for them last year, but it's not working out right now. And if this is not going to change, you're doing a disservice to yourself by putting him in the lineup and playing him in high leverage situations.
Well, if they don't cut bait with him at the end of the season, they might even cut bait with him before the end of the season. I mean, the trade deadline is less than 50 days away from this recording at the very least. What do you think the Penguins need to add heading into that stretch run?
Yeah, I think, I mean, Casey DeSmith, he saved his job for now. Let's say that. He had one game. He had that probably, it's crazy to me. I said this to myself when I was watching that game. He probably has the save of the year for the Penguins, and it's not the potential future Vezina Trophy finalist who was just played out of his mind this year.
Yeah.
Great game for him, but can he continue that? If he can't, I think they're going to have to go out and get a backup goalie. It would be full circle if they got Yaroslav Halak or Braden Holtby, just because those two goaltenders have tortured the Penguins at times over the years, especially Halak. I don't want to go back to when I was 13 years old watching that series. But it would piss off a lot of Capitals fans, so I think I'd be here for that. And Holtby would too. But I think that's probably where, if they want to make a move, they can. But, you know, I have seen this argument, you know, thrown around as well. Are you going to get better goaltending from one of those goaltenders that are on the market while giving up assets than you would if Casey DeSmith somehow turns it around? And I think, you know, it's a fair question, just because he did have a really good start and the talent is there. Like I saw it in that last game. We saw it last year. It's just, can it be consistent? And we haven't seen that so far, just because he's been so bad this year. But, you know, if he can string together some more starts like that, I think he'll save his job. I think that's one area, though. I mean, maybe if you want to look for another defenseman, you know, I'll say this: John Marino hasn't been good this year, and it pains me to say that because of how great of a rookie season he had. But he's been being bullied in front of the net almost all year. It's definitely not his strong point, you know. And you know, to think that some people in this fan base bullied Marcus Pettersson about that. I mean, dude, the guy's probably having one of his best seasons of his career, and he's not getting bullied in front of the net like Marino is. And that contract, man, 5 more years, $4.4 million. If he plays like this, it's a slippery slope. Once thought of a pretty good signing by Jim Rutherford could look kind of bad. I've seen people throw around John Klingberg. Probably not going to happen, even though it would be a lot of fun.
Mhm.
But I do think they could use potentially an upgrade there if Marino does not figure this out because he's just not looking like the same player. Forward wise, I mean, again, if you want to move on from Kapanen, okay, what are you gonna do though?
Mhm.
Like, how are you going to replace him? Are you going to do it internally, or do you want to bring in someone? Maybe make a trade with Vancouver because Jim Rutherford is there. Somehow bring in like I don't know, Connor Garland, JT Miller kind of type player. Probably not, just because I'm sure JT Miller or Connor Garland will bring in a much bigger haul than Kasperi Kapanen here. But Jim Rutherford traded for him in the past. He could do it again. That's probably more wishful thinking on my part.
Mhm.
But if you can get a forward to replace him, by all means do it. I just don't know if Ron is going to actually do that. But hopefully Jason Zucker comes back at some point and plays pretty well as well. He's probably out for I think the next 6 weeks at least with that hernia, just because Sid was out for I think around that or a little close to over. But
Mhm.
that's probably it for the deadline. It's just I don't think we're going to see a big blockbuster move here. I don't think that's in Hextall's DNA.
That's where I was going to go with it next. I know maybe Kapanen wouldn't be enough to get a Connor Garland or even a JT Miller, but would you be willing to throw in a first round pick for next season to help this year's team? Do you think that's something that we're going to be talking about a lot heading into the trade deadline? Is the first round pick safe in Pittsburgh this year, which has always been a conversation? Do you think, or at least if you were in Ron's shoes, would you be willing to trade that first round pick?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I think this is probably the deepest team they've had. I would say since 2017, when everyone is firing on all cylinders. I know last year's team was really deep, and
Mhm.
absolutely was. I mean, I know Tanev. Basically, the only thing that's different is Brandon Tanev and Jared McCann are not there. Imagine how good Jared McCann would be right now. But I'm just not going to go into that. But I do think you're at the end of your window, right? You're chasing four with 3 of the greatest players to ever play this game. One of them is a top 5 player of all time. The other one is definitely a top 25 player of all time, if not higher. You go all in when you can. This is not some Ken Holland retirement home crap that you hear every year with the Oilers, where you're just like, well, you pick and choose when you go all in and all this nonsense. You have 2 of the 5 best players in the game. I don't want to hear that crap. Now, I do know that Brian Burke would probably prefer to keep that first rounder. He spoke to the media, I think, on Josh Getzov's show about a month ago saying, we're not really looking to move that. But, that's all GM talk.
Yeah.
They say one thing and then they do another thing. If I were them, I would. No one is going to give a crap where this team is in 4 years if they win a cup this year. And that's 4, by the way. I mean, they would tie Gretzky and Messier right there for that dynamic duo.
Mhm.
I would. I think they have a great shot if they get healthy again and Tristan gets back to where he was. He's slipped a little bit, but I think that's expected. That's the ebbs and flows of regular season. The depth scoring is dried up. But I know that this is a really good team, and I know that they can. I think they can take down anyone in a 7-game series in this division. It's all a matter of can they beat the Florida teams, and I'm not really sure if they can with how good they've been this year. But I would, if for immediate help and for a cup run, you go all in one more time, because you know what? Nothing is guaranteed after this year. You have a few players that are not signed yet to contracts.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris Letang, Brian Rust, who that's approaching territory that they may have to keep him. But I've said a lot of times that's going to be a hard contract to fit in. Evgeny Malkin, of course, Evan Rodriguez. You go all in for all of them, and if you win it, you figure out the rest later. That's what I would do if I were Ron.
Yeah, the question then becomes, do you want a Stanley Cup or do you want another Samuel Poulin where he's at in 2 years? That's basically it's oversimplification, but realistically, that's what you're looking at in a early to late round 20s pick.
Yeah, I mean, and look how good Samuel Poulin has been. Sam Poulin has been this year. Has not been lighting up in Wilkes-Barre last I checked. Definitely, and that's what people say, like, well, you can't trade someone like that. I'm like, he's not really doing anything in Wilkes-Barre, and he's probably, I mean, for as good as he is, and I'm sure he's a good player. I
Mhm.
mean, is he really going to be an impact player in the NHL? Probably not. And that's why you see teams trade all these first rounders. I can make a comparison to the NFL, right? The Los Angeles Rams traded almost every pick in this year and next year's draft to go all in for Super Bowl this year. They're now 1 win away from winning it.
Yeah.
No one is going to care at the end if you win it, just because, you won the championship. And,
Mhm.
the Penguins, they've won 3 championships. And yes, they're going to pay the price down the line when Sid and Gino and Tanger eventually call it quits. But you don't think about that right now. You go all in. If that means, going out and getting a JT Miller, okay, pay the price for it. I'm sure Jim Rutherford, with how he always likes to make deals fair, he would probably give you a decent bargain on that. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we'll see. I think, again, I know Ron Hextall rewarded them last year. That was the reasoning why he went out and got Jeff Carter. He said the team was playing well. I wanted to reward them with this acquisition and make us deeper. With where they are in the standings right now, with the deadline coming up next month, with the team keeps chugging along, and I think they're going to turn this around. This is just a little bit of a misstep. They played really well against Washington and deserved a much better fate. I do think you're going to see him make another move.
Let's have a little bit of fun here. I have a question here that I don't know what happened in my life that made me think of this question and specifically to ask it to you. But which of these former Penguins would help this team the most if he was able to return to the lineup? None of them per se are on the trade market. None of them are per se ever going to play for the Penguins again. But which of these four would help the Penguins the most if he returned? Thomas Greiss, Patrick Hornqvist, Connor Sherry, or Ian Cole?
That's tough.
It's a weird question. I know. I don't know why I thought of it or why those four players came to my head, but I specifically was like, I want to ask Hunter this.
See, Hornqvist is good, but but Mike Matheson is playing his best hockey of his career, so I'm not really gonna say him. Greiss is good because the backup goaltender, but man,
Can I jump in and say definitely not Sherry because we tried that and it didn't work?
Yeah, I mean, that's fair.
That one's a no
He doesn't
show.
really do much in Washington unless he scores against the Penguins. He has 7 goals in 14 games against them for some divine reason. I don't really understand that. Yeah, I think it's Cole or Greiss. I'm gonna have to say, man. See that you're stumping me there. I think I might lean. This is I think I might lean Ian Cole just because of how John Marino has played this year. I would say Thomas Greiss, and I probably should just because the backup goaltender spot has not been good. But I think they could honestly do better than Thomas Greiss at the backup goalie spot. Ian Cole, if you were to pair him, on that second pairing, I mean, Pettersson with him, I know it's 2 lefties, but, it would make a lot of sense. Honestly, you could deploy that as your shot suppression pairing, and they would do pretty good. And if you wanted to deploy Ruedel and Matheson a little more, just because with how good Matheson is offensively this year, I think that would make a lot of sense. I would just say Cole, just because he was really good in front of the net. He would always make that responsible decision in his offense, in his defensive zone, and Marino just hasn't been able to do that on a consistent basis this year. But it's close, but that's where I would lean for helping the team right now.
Okay.
Well, even without these options that were given, do you look at the Penguins as legitimate Stanley Cup contenders right now? And what other teams across the league do you have your eye on?
I do. Yeah, I think that, I said earlier, I think they can take down any team in this division in a 7-game series. I don't think the Rangers are that good. They are carried by Henrik Lundqvist Jr., the best defenseman in the NHL, one of the best wingers in the NHL, and then Chris Kreider, who all of a sudden has decided to be Alex Ovechkin this year, and of course Mika Zibanejad, that's good too. But you look at the rest of that team, their underlying numbers are among the worst in the NHL. Their expected goals are bottom 5. Their shot attempts per 60 are bottom 5. Almost all their underlines are bad. It's just that they're getting an all-world season from their goaltender, who is rightfully going to win the Vezina, and their elite talent has stepped up. That's the only reason why they're winning. I think the Penguins would beat them. Carolina obviously is going to be a tough out. I think Washington is good, but I think in 2 of the 3 meetings this year, Pittsburgh has really bullied them, and I think Pittsburgh bullied them last year as well. I think the Penguins would beat them in a 7-game series. Obviously I have my eye on the 2 Florida teams. Panthers are good. I mean, that's
Yep.
I think we need to see another battle of Florida down there because I think the Panthers can take them this year. With how Bobrovsky's going, how their top 6 is playing, Ekblad's healthy. I think with how tired Tampa is going to be probably this year, I think they would take them. Toronto's Toronto until they prove otherwise. Don't sleep on Boston though. I mean, they have the perfection line. They have Charlie McAvoy. Tuukka Time is back. That's a good team. But I was going to throw this out there for you guys. I think we need to see another Penguins-Carolina Hurricane series. We haven't seen one in 12, 13 years now.
Mhm.
I mean, I think these are two teams that play very similar hockey, two of the best coaches in the league. I hopefully could go down because I'm only 2.5 hours away from Raleigh at this point. But you got the Jordan Staal revenge series.
Yep.
It's a series I think a lot of people should hopefully want, but I do see this team as cup contenders. Their underlying numbers are among the best in the league. They've gotten some of the best goaltending in hockey this year. They have all the superstars ready to go, and you combine all that, and and of course the depth, and that has the makings of a team that can make a deep run. It's just all that, can Tristan not fold under pressure like he did last year? Can the depth scoring get back? And can this team get back to where they were playing just to be out, a week and a half ago? Because, we saw it last night. They were that freaking good. And, sometimes that's the game of hockey. You don't win when you play your best. But, they rediscovered their game, which I think is just as important. They'll be ready to go going up against Boston next week, a place they have not won in almost a decade at this point, which is ridiculous. But I think that's kind of where I stand on that. But again, it's going to be a dogfight. The East is really tough this year, but with how the goaltending has been and the stars and all that, I think they got a shot. I really do.
Well, thank you, Hunter, for joining us. Before we let you go, let us know what's coming up for you on Locked On Penguins.
Yeah, so I'm going to have an episode coming out later today. Probably just, look at this whole week as a whole and just, get my thoughts on which hopefully will happen coming up for the break here. Thursday, I'm having Jesse Marshall on, so that's going to be huge. I'm excited to bring him back. I haven't had him on, I don't think, since a few months now, I believe. But, we're just going to go into the first half of the season as a whole and just touch on a whole bunch of topics. And then, we're all full steam ahead going into next week when the team will be back in action in Boston, and they'll go to Ottawa to hopefully see old friend Matt Murray.
Yes, it's going to be an interesting second half of the NHL season. But one last time, Hunter, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody, make sure you check out Locked On Penguins. It's always fun talking to Jesse Marshall wherever he's talking. So check out that episode coming out later this week. One last time, thanks again, Hunter.
Yeah, you got it, guys.